right now and the mounting backlash against the state's controversial Stand Your Ground law in the wake of the George Zimmerman murder trial. The governor, in his first public comments since the verdict, saying that while he mourns the death of Trayvon Martin, he has no plans to amend the law. This as scores of protesters outside his office remain there for another day, and they're refusing to back down. Let's bring in CNN's John Zarrella. He's got the very latest on what's going on. What is going on, John?
Wolf, as you mentioned, those protesters in Tallahassee at the governor's office continuing their sit-in now into its third day. The governor, of course, nowhere near Tallahassee. He was in Tampa today. And at the same time that was going on, nationwide, these Justice for Trayvon rallies and vigils this weekend, this Saturday, are beginning to take shape.
We, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty.
For the first time since the George Zimmerman verdict, Florida's Governor Rick Scott spoke publicly. The governor saying that right after the shooting, he assembled a task force to evaluate the state's Stand Your Ground law, even though Zimmerman never invoked the law.
They listened to experts, and they concluded that we didn't need to make a change to the law, and I agree with their conclusion.
Scott was in Tampa, not at the Capitol in Tallahassee. There, about 24 protesters waited for a third day at his office.
Who do we want? Rick Scott! When do we want him? Now!
Calling themselves Dream Defenders, the group wants Scott to call a special session of the Republican-controlled state legislature in hopes they can get Florida's Stand Your Ground law repealed. The governor has already said that's not going to happen. The session or repeal.
We don't plan for him to give in easily. That's why we want people to understand that we're not going to leave until we've shown him that this fight is for real.
State Democratic leaders gathered in Fort Lauderdale saying the fight against Stand Your Ground is for real. They're calling for the legislature to, at the very least, look at amending the law. They acknowledge it won't be easy, but doing nothing, they say, could lead to a boycott of Florida. Conventions, tourism.
And if there's inaction by the legislature, if there's inaction by the leaders of this state, I see those voices gaining in popularity throughout this nation. Florida has to act.
The moves are not just aimed at the Florida law. Justice for Trayvon rallies and vigils are planned across the nation this Saturday to pressure the Justice Department to investigate whether Zimmerman's actions violated Martin's civil rights.
National Justice for Trayvon Day.
Organizers, including the Reverend Al Sharpton, say events will take place in at least 100 cities, including New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Dallas, Miami, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. The National Action Network says Sabrina Fulton Martin's mother will be at the New York rally at One Police Plaza. His father, Tracy, will be at the Miami event. Now, I spoke to Miami police late this afternoon, Wolf, and they say, look, they expect it to be peaceful here, and that certainly is the expectation at these rallies and vigils across the country. Wolf?
Let's hope that stays like that. All right, thanks very much, John Zarrella, reporting dramatic new insight from inside the jury room in the Zimmerman trial. An alternate juror in the case is now the second person to come forward and speak publicly. In an interview with WFOL, he reacted to all of the protests we're seeing in the wake of the not guilty verdict.
I just don't understand the civil rights complaint. I didn't see the evidence there that in the courtroom that would make anybody believe there's a civil rights case for this. The protest, you know, people are going to be angry no matter what the verdict was, and there's nothing we can do about that.
Justin, ahead in our 6 p.m. Eastern hour, we're going to compare and contrast this alternate jury's interview with the exclusive interview juror B37 did with our own Anderson Cooper. Meantime, the parents of Trayvon Martin, they are breaking their silence, speaking out in a series of television interviews for the first time since the verdict was announced. On CBS this morning, Martin's mother, Sabrina Fulton, responded to some of what juror B37 had to say.
Did you hear that juror who spoke out with Anderson Cooper? And what did you think when you heard her say that she believes that Trayvon played a huge role in his own death?
I don't think she knows Trayvon. Trayvon is not a confrontational person. So instead of placing the blame on the teenager, we need to place the blame on the responsible adult. There were two people involved. We had an adult that was chasing a kid, and we had the kid who I feel was afraid.
Joining us now to react to these latest interviews from the parents, CNN legal analyst, the criminal defense attorney Mark Nochange, also CNN contributor, the New York Times columnist Charles Blow. Charles, you wrote a deeply personal and powerful column in the New York Times. The whole system failed Trayvon. What, in your opinion, was the biggest failure here?
Well, I think the biggest failure was not charging George Zimmerman immediately with a crime, or even arresting him. He was taken into custody, but he was never actually arrested that night. It took 40+ days for there to be an arrest. And I think that what that points to is how we apply the presumption of innocence and guilt in cases like that. Do we value that brown body that was on the ground or not? Do we advocate for him, and now that his voice is gone, he can't tell his story, he can't give his version of events of what led to his death. But there was a man, a grown man, standing over his body with the gun that he had used to kill him, and that grown man was allowed to talk his way out of a police precinct and go home and sleep in his own bed and do that for the next 40 days. That, to me, is a real problem. And whether or not the police department was using just all of Florida's stand your ground defenses, or stand your ground, all of their self-defense laws and stand your ground, or stand your ground on its own as the way to look at that and say it's okay for him to go home, it's a problem. The way the laws are written is a problem. And what B37, juror B37 says is she invoked stand your ground as a reason why, part of the reason that they acquitted and let George go home again. And that's a problem, I think, systematically in Florida and across the country.
Well, let's let the Florida attorney, let Mark Nochange weigh in on that. What's your reaction?
Well, I agree with it in great part. We have a systematic issue that just permeates our culture. We have a great divide. We have inequities in the system. I've been doing this an awful long time. What concerns me is that this was not the best case for the state, but this case has become symbolic of all the inequities that exist in Florida and throughout the country. And that, I think, is what has gotten so many so upset, that we have a situation where we have a young teenager dead, and we know that he was unarmed, and we know all the facts, and people argue back and forth. But what we have in this culture is we do have inequities in our system, with the police, with the court system, and otherwise. And I think this has become a rallying point, a rallying cry for all the vast discrepancies and the vast inequities that we have in our culture. And so what I'm concerned about is that we're going to have a knee-jerk reaction to the Stand Your Ground law. Look, this is an NRA-backed law. It's been in effect, we've got it in 30 states now. It's been since in the 1990s with Jeb Bush in Florida. And we've got a Republican-based legislature, so the chances politically of getting this overturned are really, really small. But what we have to understand is that we have an issue that is far more infectious in our culture. And that is what I think so many are so upset about. Of course, it's a horrible tragedy with this young man's death. But this gets repeated every day, on and on. And let me ask a question. How many other young black teenagers have been killed since Trayvon? Many. How many other names can we name? None. And the reason is because we have a system.
No, that's not the reason. That's not the reason. I'm sorry to interrupt here. But there's a huge difference here. There's a huge moral difference. When someone is standing over a black body with a gun, that person is likely to be arrested. This is really about the fact that his body was not even valued enough that an arrest was ever made. I think that people keep citing the fact that other people are dying.
That's the point I'm making, though, that we have this happen over and over again. I've been a defense lawyer for 32, 33 years. I've seen these injustices throughout in a career and been fighting them for a career. This is a tragedy like many others are tragedy. We need to understand that this is not as uncommon as people think it is. We have inequities in our system. I don't disagree with you on that, but we have to understand that it's more than this case. We have it where we have systematic inequities in our system that a lot of times we just look the other way or we accept them. We can't accept that.
Charles, you wrote about having a conversation with your teenage sons about this, and without getting obviously too personal, I wonder if you'd share with us what you said to them.
Well, I've talked to my boys about the idea of running and things like that, and particularly in front of police at night. And you know, I try to talk about it in a way that doesn't make them too uncomfortable. Just say, you know, you really don't want that. You don't want anybody to think you stole anything, and just try to kind of have a light conversation. I have yet to even sit down after this verdict to try to figure out how do I tell them that maybe what Dad told you before is not even going to help. That in this particular case, George Zimmerman said that he was suspicious of Trayvon Martin in part because he was walking too slowly. Like, there is no actual right pace that you could walk to relieve yourself of suspicion. And I think that idea that there's nothing that I can do to protect my boys. There's nothing, if somebody wants to project somebody else's crimes or criminality onto my boys because that person has an experience with somebody who looks like them, who committed a crime or saw it on television or heard about it or read about it in a newspaper, there's actually nothing that I can do. And that as a parent, that defeats you. That wounds your spirit. The fact that you cannot do something to protect your child. That is hard. That is hard for me to do. I have yet to do it. I have yet to have that conversation with them because I can't bring myself to say it.
And people all over the country are going to have these kinds of conversations in the aftermath of this trial. Charles Blow, thanks very much for joining us. Mark Nijane, thanks to you as well. This important note to our viewers, you're going to want to tune in to Anderson Cooper 360 later tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern on CNN. He's going to sit down with Trayvon Martin's parents, Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin. He'll speak with them live. This is an all-new interview that will air only here on CNN. Much more on this story coming up later in the Situation Room. When we come back, though, amazing new images of that raging California wildfire from one of the 6,000 residents just evacuated. She's here in the Situation Room. That's coming up. And Italy claims it's about to nab an American ex-CIA station chief.